tervetuloa Byyriin. Pari-kolme viikkoa sitten meidät kutsuttiin Ham Fans Finlandin järjestämään tapahtumaan, missä kävi Sir Trevor Brookingin, joka on Ham legenda. Itse sain sen kunnian tehdä pienen haastattelun siinä yleisön edessä, ja nyt tämä video onkin siitä, se haastattelu suoraan pätkimättä. Pitää vielä sen sanoa, että upea tapahtuma kannattajayhdistykseltä ja kaikki terveiset jokaiselle Ham kannattajalle Suomessa.
And I'm honored to have the opportunity to interview Sir Trevor Brookingin. Hello.
Thank you very much.
Sir.
Yep, very pleased to be here.
So my first question is, can I call you? Do I need to call you Sir?
No.
Or Sir Trevor, or
no, Trevor.
How do we go there?
Just call it Trevor. Yeah.
Perfect.
I get called a lot of things, but
perfect. So just a quick recap. You played for West Ham United over 18 seasons, had 643 appearances in all competitions, and scored lots of goals. And in England, you did 47 appearances with 5 goals. And what actually struck me when I was younger and I saw you the first time, you were the caretaker of West Ham for a few games, at least, or for a short time.
Yeah, that was about 2002-1. I was invited to be a director. Terry Brown was the owner at the time, and so I was a director, and then Glenn Roeder was the. Okay.
There we are. No, it's all right. No, it's all right.
Yep, is that it? Yeah, Glenn Roeder was the manager, and he'd done okay for a year or so, and he'd been sort of appointed, and it was at the first start of when you had the January transfer window. And I came in about September, and I'd watched what had gone on, and unfortunately, I mean, it was an experiment as such, but we had 2 great strikers at the time, Freddie Canuti, do you remember Freddie?
Yeah.
And Paolo Di Canio. And so...
Paolo!
Oh, Paolo. Okay.
Paolo Di Canio! Paolo Di Canio! Paolo Di Canio! Paolo Di Canio!
Right. But we had those 2 strikers. Then we had a 16, 17-year-old youngster called Jermaine Defoe.
Yeah.
And then we had 2 or 3 players who weren't very good from the previous signings. And so what we found out pretty quickly was we were short of strikers. And that, you know, in those days, that was the first experiment into September, October, November, December. You couldn't sign anyone, and then you got the opportunity in the January transfer window. So if you were around at that stage, we played Arsenal in early September, absolutely murdered them in a game. Freddie scored, and then they got a late equaliser, and we ended up drawing 2-2. The significance of that is we didn't win a home game that season until January the 24th. So we started in September, should have beaten Arsenal, and then Freddie did a hamstring. He was one of those, from a religious point of view, Muslim, and they had a month where they weren't allowed to eat certain things.
Yeah, Ramadan.
And so during that time he was injured, whether it was because he wasn't eating properly, he re-aggravated the hamstring. So he ended up being out for 9 weeks, which wasn't good. And then Paolo also got injured and proceeded to be out for 6 or 7 weeks. So 2 strikers and a 16, 17-year-old Jermaine having to play was not great. And so we got to December, and we had a centre-half who ended up playing up front, if anyone remembers back in those, Ian. And yeah, so during that spell, we arrived at January the 1st, near the bottom, and trying to sign a striker, and the striker we identified was Les Ferdinand. But Spurs, obviously being a London club, were not too cooperative in us getting him too quickly, and so it took us 3 weeks to get him, and then 2 days after we signed him, he then scored. Yeah, we beat Blackburn, and that was our first home win. Four sides were near the bottom, and 2 of them stayed near the bottom, and then ourselves and Bolton under Sam at the time, Sam Allardyce, started picking up points, but we were always 3 or 4 points behind them. And so as we got towards the end of the season, we were still those 3 or 4 points, and that's when Glenn had a brain tumour, collapsed, and then I stepped in as a caretaker manager for 3 games. We just missed out staying up, and so we went down with 42 points, 2 points behind Bolton, which is still, unfortunately, a record we don't want, but it's the highest. Yeah. So we had a 42 points, which was a record point, so anyone going down. Then the start of next season, when Glenn had recovered, after 3 or 4 games when it hadn't gone particularly well, Glenn was sacked. I stepped in initially for just 2 games. I wasn't happy then because obviously Glenn was ill before, but this time they sacked him. And then we had sort of 2 games during the international break where we identified Alan Pardew, knocked on his door. He was at Reading, so he was going to join us. And then the owner of John Majewski wasn't too happy because he'd let another manager, Mark McGee, go off to another club. The fans didn't think he'd protected the club, and so this time round he accused us of illegal approach, and there was a big row. And then in the end they said, all right, Alan could join West Ham, but he had to go on 6 weeks gardening leave. So that's when I ended up doing a few more games as the manager. So that was my little spell, but Pards came in, and then a couple of months after he came in, I thought it was best if I left, because people have been talking about being a manager, and if Pards lost a couple of games, then people would put us on pressure to come in to manage. So I went off to the FA for about 11 years and watched West Ham from there. But I'd always promised my wife also that I wouldn't take on the unpredictable. She never wanted to spoil the rapport that I had with the fans. She said, if you're a manager, you'll have 1 season where it all goes wrong, you get the sack, and that would sort of just tarnish it. So you can blame your Finnish wife for persuading me not to take the unpredictable. And you will always have 1 or 2 injuries. And to be fair, in the in the 90s and whatever at West Ham, we had our ups and downs, as you know, but we never were financially strong, which would meant you were never guaranteed to be able to buy players coming in. And so a manager, if you had 2 injuries of key players, you were suddenly in trouble, and that's when results could go askew. So that was one of the reasons why I never took over.
Well, that was my introduction question, so let's see how this goes.
Is that it? Yeah.
But
I'll keep them short.
But as I was planned to say was that I was in that game because I'm an Arsenal fan, unfortunately.
All right.
Yeah.
I thought you were keen on football.
That
was nasty.
That said, I saw the game that ended 2-2, and then and then I saw this name, and I understood that this man has a Finnish wife. Yes. So that was actually was the first point of my life when it led to you. And I was asking you, how's your Finnish?
My Finnish is not particularly good. I did start to try and learn 1 to 10. Uksi, kuksi, komini, and
well, we will say improving at least. Yeah.
And then Kiitos, obviously, I've got to say thank you.
Yeah.
Sutle minia, yes. Is that kiss me? Yeah, is that for don't? Yeah. So little 1 word. It's a really tough language.
It is.
So my wife did say you should, because it's good to speak, and she did try to get my 2 children to learn it, but I got to sit here and say that I abandoned ship after a while.
All right.
But we're very spoiled because all the Scandinavians and Finns. I mean, your English is fantastic, so we get lazy, don't we, and don't bother. But
that's it. Well, but hey, let's start. So, My first question, how do you see the change between football now and back then when you were playing?
Well, I mean, the first... Yeah, well, no, money's not... I mean, the weird thing is, when I was a youngster kicking a ball around, I mean, you know, you kicked around 4, 5 and 6. I was lucky my brother was 3 years older than me, so I tended to go, you know, kick about over the park on that with him and playing with his mates who are 2 or 3 years older than me. So that helped physically to deal with the game of football. But the big difference, sitting here now with my grandchildren who have the, apart from social media, all the TV channels, I only had the opportunity to watch one channel on TV, which was BBC One. So there weren't many distractions to keep you indoors when you've only got one TV channel and it's black and white. So every opportunity, my brother and I was over the school playing field, kicking the ball around with their friends. And then, you know, back in those days, we had a little terrace house with a couple of drain pipes. We had a block of concrete about 10 yards before we reached the grass. And I used to kick the tennis ball one touch. And when I was younger, I was right footer, and I could eventually, you know, 8, 9, 10 out of 10 with my right. But my dad then told me when I was 4 or 5, it's going to be useful to kick with both feet. So I then practiced for about 6 months and got my left foot as good as my right. So then when I started playing, you know, football at 6, 7 at school with a team, I just kicked the ball with whichever foot it came to. And so I only knew later on, when obviously I was lucky enough to get the chance to play professionally, how important that was going to be, because you know, against better players they suddenly look at you, what foot does he favour, and they showed me one way and I went that way and was happy to cross, and then he showed me the other way and I went that way. So that was a problem for him. So I'm always grateful to my dad that he got me to kick with both feet. Yeah.
So, as the audience pointed out, financial and money plays a huge role now. What kind of challenges do you see in it?
What challenges? You mean from the what with?
Because money is such a big factor nowadays.
It's one of those. How do you resolve it? Because it's more than a challenge, really. I mean, you've got to accept it. It's not easy. But in my day at West Ham, we had, obviously, very lucky when I joined the club as a youngster. 1964 was when the time I had to make a decision who I joined. And the funny one, just as it was in about April 1964, I'd had 12 clubs come wanting me to join, but not West Ham. So at that stage, in April 1965, I was choosing between, believe it or not, Chelsea and Spurs. So Spurs were managed by Spurs were managed by Bill Nickerson, a famous coach, and Spurs had a good team but tended to go into the transfer market if they needed anyone. Chelsea had a really good youth structure, and the manager was a very funny lad called Tommy Doherty, who also managed at Manchester United. So at that stage I was leaning towards Chelsea, and then as luck would have it, West Ham, who was the side I'd supported, and I saw them get promoted from the second division 57-58, so I'd gone with Dad and everything. The manager had been a gentleman called Ted Fenton, and then in 62-63 Ron Greenwood took over. So Ron was the manager. The chief scout who got a lot of the players to the club, Bobby Moore, Jeff Hurst and Martin Peters, was a gentleman called Wally St Pierre. So Wally St Pierre luckily said to Ron Greenwood, I've got a game between Ilford boys, who I was playing for, against Oxford boys in a big quarter-final of the English Schools Trophy, which was like the FA Cup of schools football. So we had a striker in the Ilford boys team who was joining West Ham in the summer, and we had a central defender in the opposition, Oxford, who was also joining. So Wally took Ron Greenwood to watch the 2 players who were joining in the summer. As I said, he invited Ron, and Ron told me several weeks later during the game and after the game, then he watched and he said to Wally, the Ilford number 4, which was me, we need to see him. Why haven't we seen him? So So Wally got the instructions to knock on my mum and dad's door next day, and say, come down. Wally, I always remember, it's quite funny. Wally making the excuse for not coming round, saying, you just got knocked out of that English, so we thought we'd wait until you were knocked out. So my mum, who was quite a blunt lady, said, was a bit surprised, Mr. Sapir, because 12 other clubs have come round. So she wanted to make him realise that she realised it wasn't him, but it was Ron. And when West Ham turned up, fine, I went along. The big key at 64 was I was going to stay on an extra year, do my schooling, and sign for a 2-year apprenticeship. And so I joined them in 65. They were happy with that. And of course, I couldn't have picked a better time if you're a Hammers fan. 64, we won the FA Cup. Yes. We beat Preston 3-2. But if you're a Hammers fan, as good as winning the final was probably the semi-final when we beat Manchester United 3-1. And that was up at Hillsborough, and in the Man United side were Bobby Charlton, Dennis Law and George Best, so that was a pretty good win. Yeah. So 64 we were celebrating, and then of course in 64 that meant you got in the European Companies Cup, and of course 12 months later in 65 in May we won the European Companies Cup, and that was when we beat Munich 1860 at Wembley 2-0. So FA Cup 64, 65 European Companies Cup, and then of course if you're a West Ham fan in 66 we won the World Cup. Well, we did. Probably a slight mistake, but the fact that we had 3 key players, I mean Bobby Moore the captain, Jeff Hurst who got a hat-trick in the final, which has never been repeated since in the final, and then the other goal in a 4-2 victory with our third man, Marty Peters. It was a pretty amazing story, and so when we came back pre-season, 64 FA Cup, 60, and suddenly 66, 3 World Cup lads. I mean, the place, the training ground was heaving with all press and media people who just wanted to see how England had won a World Cup, and now they'd won it with 3 people. Oops, yeah, look, even the barman is shocked that we won it. But so it was a great time to join the club, and you know, as a young player, you can only help but learn from 3 players like that in training every day.
There has been some talk about how much for the fans the ticket costs nowadays.
Yes.
So do you think that the owners should somehow subsidize the ticket cost for the fans?
I mean, one of the only slight bonuses from going to the new ground, which I know some people don't like, but at least it's gone from 35 to 55, 56,000, means a lot more people are able to come to the game. And to be fair, the club have tried to attract families by making the children's prices very, cheaper, because they've got extra 20,000 seats. It's still a lot of money. I mean, it's a bit like, it's not just the entrance fees, it's like the shirts,
everything.
Yeah, the commercial side of things.
And even if you want to see games on telly, you need to pay.
And it is frustrating, I'm sure, for the fans. We're exceptionally lucky that, and anyone, West Ham's fan base is probably as loyal as anyone, I would like to think.
They are.
You've probably got to be as loyal as anyone, having gone through the trauma of supporting this guy for the last however many years, because no year is predictable, is it? So,
we are not glory hunters.
No, you're not glory hunters. But it's So the new stadium. The biggest problem, I think, comparing, let's say, when I was playing, we had a first team squad of 18 in those days. If you look at even the year we won the cup in 80, then we had a good year after that, we got promoted and then we went up. We always had a squad of the most 18 players, and probably 14 players that you liked to rotate. Now you got 25 players in a first team squad. I would think after the first month of the season, most managers could say 5 of the 25, they don't fancy playing in the first team. So you've got a 25-man squad, 20% of them not as good as you thought they were going to be.
Youth players or something like that.
Well, not
all. Yeah,
because the key to that is those 5 players. I think quite a few of them you'll find to be on 25, 30 grand a week.
Yeah.
So they are taking out a lot of money, and actually, you know, I know a couple of Man City who haven't played first team football. They've got £2-3 million house. They've got 2 or 3 cars. They're earning 30 grand a week, but they haven't played a first team match yet. Now that's pretty scary, and so I think the worst thing about the current climate, I don't begrudge any of the lads getting the top money and whatever if they're delivering in the first team, but you've got a lot of fringe players who end up millionaires and actually haven't delivered for the club, and that's probably the biggest disappointment, because you have to keep that squad of 25 players around.
Well, coming to that about how the squad is built nowadays, you have a lot of like players, international players, outside from the club grounds or the youth system.
Yeah.
How do you think that the club identity is taught to these kind of new players? And is it?
Well, there's 2 areas. First of all, you'd like more players to be home produced if you could, because they will have an affinity or a feeling for the club that your person from abroad won't have. So back in my day, there weren't really any foreign players. You had English, Scottish, Welsh, Irish, and you blended in, and there was a great affinity with them. I think we spoke about it earlier with somebody this afternoon I was speaking to. When I packed up playing in 1984, in the late 80s and the early 90s, English football suffered badly with hooliganism and problems back at home. And during that spell, when we actually, if I don't know, we were banned from Europe, English clubs or whatever, and so you had several years where I was working on BBC and the radio, TV, and I was describing games where the ball was launched from one penalty area to the other, and people were just nodding the ball down in the air and score. I mean, the actual quality of the football was really poor. So we had a little generation of English players that were not very good technically. So then, from the England point of view, that wasn't great. And then when suddenly somebody come up with the idea, let's produce the Premier League, and quickly the people who were funding the Premier League realised, goodness me, this isn't going to be very good quality unless we bring in some overseas players. So to their credit, they brought that in to fill the void. And of course, since then, over the last 15 years, I think we've been trying to edge back the number of English players. I think as we sit here now, it's probably about just over 30% of the starting 11s are English. But in my era, when it was nearly 100%, so it's a big difference. And
it is.
You've now got to try and I think, I had 11 years at the FA, and I'd like to think we changed a lot of things. We've got some good results about 15 months ago when the under-17s won the World Cup, the 19s won the Europeans, the 20s won the World Cup, the 21s lost to Germany in the Euros. So you've got an age group where there's some good young players. You've seen Sancho the other day played well when he came on a sub in the squad. You've got Phil Foden who played in the under-21s in that same under-17 age group. Sorry?
Declan.
Oh yeah, well Declan's did. I mean, then you've got, Hudson Doy, who was in the under-17s, who's at Chelsea, and you've got the lad who's at Liverpool, who plays up front and scored the goals, 6 goals. So you've got 4 when we beat Spain in the final, 5-2, which was amazing, really, because Spanish are always good technically. So we've got some younger ones. They've got to be playing first-team football, and that's a big debate. Will they get chosen by those bigger clubs to play first-team football? All right. You've got Sancho's got abroad to find it. Foden's playing in and out of City, but we've got to try and get them playing first-team football somewhere in the next 2 or 3 years if they're going to come on physically. But I think we've got a decent group coming through now. I think last summer getting to the semi-finals and in the tournament was great, but we did have a good route in the final. But it probably top 4 came too early, but I think the tournaments in the next few years we will be competitive. Be very interested in 2 years' time the Euros, because I don't know if you follow it. That's the one where you've got 8 8 groups of 4.
Yeah.
And so 32 countries,
Yes.
which is a lot when you've only got 50 odd countries. But
Well, that's a possibility for Finland. So let's not shout that down yet.
You mean Finland, the unbeaten group team who won 1-0 last night?
Exactly that. Exactly that.
I saw the goal, and Estonia, wasn't it? I think 91st minute, and your goal scorer was playing for Norwich, isn't he? All right, steady. But no, they're doing well. More than anything, yeah, they've got a chance because looking at that group, they'll probably go into the next one, won't they? So they'll go up one for the next cycle. But more than anything, you know, it's a case really in 2020, 8 groups of 4.
Yeah.
The way it got organised, 8 countries will host 8 groups. Then you go into the knockout 16, where some other countries, another 4.
Yeah.
Then you go into the quarterfinals with another 2. But the 2 semis and the final are at Wembley. So the young England group have got an incentive because there's been the debate also. One of the 8 group matches, one of the 8 groups might be in England as well. So if you could get England playing in the group match, then they've got to get through the 16s and the 8s, but then play the semis and the final. That young group has got a great chance of success in the Euros in 2020. Woo! Yeah. So we shall watch this space. Who knows? We could play Finland en route. Yeah.
All right.
Our new Olympic Stadium.
Yeah. So let's get back to this West Ham and this season. What are your initial thoughts about this season so far?
Well, if you'd have asked me in the summer, because having had 2 seasons of nervous twitchiness towards the end of the season, looking over our shoulder, we were going to stay up. It was good that they spent the money. All right, they brought in Pellegrini. He seems very good, you know, very experienced. When you bring in 9 or 10 players, though, it's a risk, and not all of them are going to be success. I'd have said at the start of the season, before that disastrous opening 4, but I still say now, as they've picked up halfway in the table, 10th, I'd take 10th at the start of the season because you're bringing in a new wave of people. Are they going to mix? And he's taking his time. And as we sit here now, having lost the first 4 games, Liverpool was terrible. I went to that game, and we could have lost 7 or 8.
Me too.
Then Bournemouth won. We should have got something from that. Although Bournemouth, yes, we've seen it doing well. Arsenal, we should have got something. Missed some chances, gave a couple of soft goals away, and then, I mean, the Wolves won. The Wolves played quite well, but the goal we gave away in the 93rd minute was, I mean, it was
a bit disastrous.
Well, even if your school's team gave that away, you wouldn't be happy, would you? So 4 games, we're in trouble. Then, you know, Everton played well, scored the goals, and then, you know, Chelsea, I think we're the only ones to take the points off Chelsea. And then Man United got them at the right time, but put them away. And then Brighton was a big disappointment because I thought, as long as we don't lose there, the momentum's kept going. Then we've had another break. So, who's done well? I mean, the keeper's been excellent. Fabianski, really good signing. And, over the last 2 or 3, Diop's been very good. 22 million, one of the big signings, but he's playing well. And Balbuena, still, he was a yard short of pace when he first came in, made a couple of errors. But obviously, Pellegrini doesn't fancy Bonnet because he hasn't played that much other than a couple of the cup games. Right back Zabaleta's played quite well. But I do think Fredericks will be okay. Give him a chance, he'll be fine. Masuaku, well,
Question mark.
question mark. Well, no, I think
Yes. No.
if you're gonna play 3 at the back and 2 wing backs, then he's a good wing back. If you're going to play a fat back 4, then Creswell seems to be the flat back 4. So for the goal against Brighton, although Yarmolenko gave it away near the halfway line, the defending late on was terrible for the fella coming in because Diop had to go to the near post, and he actually told Masuaku to pick up Murray, but he didn't. And so that, you know, that's the defence. Midfield is the big debate. Declan's done great.
Yes.
and he did great in the last 3 months of the season, playing 3 at the back. So he can play in any of the positions. I mean, Obiang and Nobes means naturally Jack could be the one. He'll get another chance, I'm sure, and I do think at 26, 27 he's going to get a good enough spell where he can prove his worth. So Jack is the debate, because as we would talk about, you know, so where are we when we go through those? Up front, Arnautovic has been great, and let's give credit to Moisey, to be fair, moving in from wide, playing, whatever you want to say, he has made a big difference playing through the middle. Then Anderson hasn't played well at home, he's played better away. I think it can be a bit flaky, but he's got some skill, and I think...
And he defends.
Yeah, he tracks back. Now. First couple at Liverpool, there was... Then Yarmolenko. A lot of ability. He late coming into training from the point of view of injuries and that, so he was behind people. He's still fitness-wise not quite there, but he got 2 great goals against Everton at home. Then he did well, and was a bit flaky for the Brighton goal where he lost the possession and whatever. But he will score spectacular goals, and so he could. We need to try and get Antonio back playing where he was a couple of years ago.
Antonio.
Yeah. And then, well, the massive one towards the end of the season of next year is my favourite player, which is Lanzini, and you've got to remember it's been tough for Pellegrini without him, which you couldn't have predicted.
Yeah, but
so,
where he's gonna play?
Don't worry, he can play in a few different positions. So, no. If you really want to know, and we can't. Yeah, let's see how Jack does. Don't worry, Lanzini can play behind the front man, in front of 2 midfielders, so don't worry about that. Sorry?
Tell me how don't have the Yarmolenko or the
Anderson?
Anderson the sides.
Yeah, and then Lanzini in behind Arnautovic.
Yeah, in the number 10 position.
Two on the defensive.
Yeah, well, that's okay with me. Declan and another. Anyway, let's get him fit first, because at the moment he's not fit. So we've got to try and get Antonio playing better, get a little bit more from Perez. I thought, to be fair, then Sloven's done okay. He's worked hard, and you know he might not be your favourite midfield player, but he's done a decent job. And in fact, him and Perez did create a great chance for Arnautovic in the last minute at Brighton, where they should have got an equaliser. But Hernandez hasn't done it really. I mean, he's glandular fever or whatever, but he's not been the player we were hoping either. So so as we sit here at the moment, I think we're much tighter now defensively. I think we will finish midway at worst. I really do. Yeah. Midfield, I'm looking at how Jack does, seeing how Lanzini comes back, because creatively we do need something else in midfield.
Do you think that they can play together?
Who?
Jack and Lanzini.
Jack and Lanzini? Yeah, I can, because well, if Jack's playing as more as an attacking player, I mean, look, it's a really attacking lineup then.
It would be.
If you wanted to be really attacking, you could have Declan holding and Jack and Lanzini either side, and those other 3. If that's too attack-minded, then you have Declan and either Nobes or Obiang, and then somebody in the hole. Is that Jack or Lanzini? Yeah. You could have Jack there, and Lanzini could replace Yarmolenko. Yeah, because he'd be more consistently better in it, but Yarmolenko would be an impact player and whatever. So you're not going to have everyone fit. So you need, and I would also still look for another striker,
Andy.
I think that was
Did you
telling.
say that would be Andy, or would that be handy? Look, Andy on his day is a handful, but I mean, his contract finishes in the summer, and he's got to be playing for 3 or 4 months consecutively to have any chance of getting signed on after that, because you know his appearance record over the last couple of years means you can't plan for Andy being there on a regular basis. So that's up to him from now to the end of the season. I don't think he's going to be available till next month at the earliest. So after that, it's up to him really.
What do you think needs to happen in order that West Ham reaches a higher level? Let's say at the moment, in the beginning, you were talking about top 6. Do you think top 4? And what needs to happen in order that?
This year I said.
Not this year. But
this year we have to get in the top 10.
Next year. Yeah. What needs to happen?
So right, let's look at the Premier League. So where are we in the Premier League? If you look at the Premier League, there is a, let's say, top 6, which are obviously the two Manchesters, Liverpool, and then Chelsea, Arsenal, and Spurs.
Yes.
Arsenal have done better than I thought with a new manager, to be fair, without at times playing great, but they've got the points, and so they're up there. So that's 6. Then after them, Wolves have been doing well. Let's give them credit. They've done well, and they played try to pass the ball. So I don't think that'll be a little blip. I don't think they'll hang in there a bit. Leicester have got a half-decent squad if they can get the consistency there. Watford started well. They've just lost a couple, and then Everton, of course, you know, have got the resources, but they haven't bought particularly well. But if you look at the top 6, and then we've said, or I've said, you know, you're looking at the likes of Everton and Leicester and Wolves, and you know, West Ham have to be at the moment in that category where you're in that middle sector, and you don't want to get into the bottom 6 or 7, which are at the moment the 3 teams at the bottom have struggled at the start: Huddersfield, Newcastle, and Cardiff. Then there's 2 or 3. I mean, by letting Brighton win, they've jumped over us, but they've still got not the resources that the others. Southampton are struggling a little bit, and you know, those sort of clubs you want to keep out of that area. So it's important now till Christmas to get to the position where we are mid-table. We're going to be okay. Let's have a decent cup run if we can. I mean, League Cup at home to Spurs. We win that, we're in the last 8. And
that's in 2 weeks, right?
Yeah, but if you notice, Spurs have got problems with their stadium.
They sure have.
or with the toilet.
Problem with something else.
Well, but the exciting element of that is that they've got a league match against Man City.
Yeah.
And that weekend is when the rugby is at Wembley. Sorry, not rugby. The football, American football is at Wembley. Yeah. So they can't play till Monday night against Manchester City, and then they're due to play us Wednesday. So
so there's a chance over there.
And then they've got a league match at the weekend. So I can't see them playing a strong side in all 3 of those games. And Man City on the Monday is their top priority at home in the league. So which sort of team would they put out against us on the Wednesday? Whereas I would like to see us put a pretty strong side to try and get through and get into the last 8, which I think then we have a chance, because you know, our fans love a trip to a final, and it's a long time since we've been there, really. So, and I think with the personnel that we've got, we're quite capable of being in mid-table in the Premier League and also having a decent cup run. So that's the next interesting things, is because on the league, I think we've got Spurs at home, Leicester away, Burnley at home, I think is the next one. And then I think we're away to Huddersfield. But what I'm saying is, I'm looking to pick up points in those matches in the league and edge towards that mid-table situation.
I've always been interested in the when people talk that they're close to the club and they are, like, even though that they're not day to day anymore. They are close to the club. You've worked as a pundit, and you've been in one club quite a significant time. How was your relationship with the club ownership back when you were playing?
When I was playing, yeah, it was pretty good. I mean, you probably wouldn't remember, there was the Kearns family and the Pratt family. There was a family ownership in my time as 60s, 70s, and it was really only then in the sort of when I stopped playing, late 80s, early 90s, that Terry Brown, who came in, took over. Paul Aldridge was the and you know, they had a decent time, and then you had the spell yeah, where Pards took over and didn't get promotion that first year, lost the playoffs to Palace, and then beat Preston in the and they then finished 10th, if you remember, that following season, and all looked not bad until suddenly the owners went for Mr. Tevez and his Argentinian
management company.
Yeah, so the two of them.
Welcome to Lapland.
What about
Lapland.
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 Oh, Lapland. Oh, yeah.
All right.
What position did he play? But bringing in the striker Tevez and his midfield player meant that I spoke to Pards because I was at the FA then, and he said, I told him I need a fullback, a winger, and a midfield player, but a creative midfield player, and he's got a defensive player who can play at the back, and a striker. So we weren't the two positions he was looking for, but that was when those two came, and suddenly Par's position at the club got jeopardised. He left because it didn't work out with the players, stayed up. But then, if you remember, we had the Iceland bank squad coming in. Not the Finnish bank, the Icelandic bank. And at the time, everyone thought that was better than a couple of agents who were trying to take over the club. And we thought with a bank that would be great, but of course only West Ham could be sponsored by a bank that went bust. And that was another torturous spell, really. And then eventually the two, David Gold, David Sullivan, and Cam Brady came in, and yeah, they've been there for the last few years. But at least to a certain extent, they made the transition from Upton Park. Tough for some people, but we have got a bigger ground. I do agree they've got to get closer across the running track where the director's box is, but at least some of them spent the money, and I do think they're heading in the right direction. Now we've got to see how they do this year. Hopefully those handful of players I said that I think will be successful are, and then the big killer then is next summer, where can we get a good chunk of money to make the 3 extra signings added to Lanzini that we'll need next summer if you're going to challenge that top 6 or 7.
Perfect. I think that was more than I was originally had time for. So let's do in a sense that we'll have a short break, and I think David will continue with some questions.
Okay.
If you're up to it.
Yes.
So just a moment. Thank you.